Welcome back to part 2 of our 3-part series on the importance of financial planning for dentists. We are continuing the conversation that we left off from last week. We are joined by Ironbridge Wealth Counsel's Shane Morrow and Shannon Fowler. Cheryl Burgmaier is leading the conversation here, and today we're going to examine the differences between new docs and docs getting ready to retire. All right, so let's get started.
So cash flow on the front end for a new doc is very different than the doc on the back end. And from a valuation perspective, Rachel does the calculations on the values of practices. And so there's a number of things that she looks at. You mentioned staffing costs.
Flashback.
Speaking of dentists, it's really hard to hire hygienists. Salary-wise, they're always leaving. Office managers, no one, the inflation pressures are still very significant in the hiring market. And until that starts to change, any, stimulation of the economy gives me some concern. We're going to have some inflation pop again.
I have that conversation with dentists all day, almost every day about, I can't hire, or is this normal that this is how much the hygienist is asking for? Or not only the hygienist, but the assistants now.
The office managers, the assistants, the hiring side, and we see it on our dental clients.
End of flashback.
That's starting to have an impact on valuation.
Sure.
And I think Rachel's had some experience where it's like, you are a generous employer, and that's great, but you're leaving the practice, and now the new guy is in a completely different situation. He's trying to accumulate wealth and not give it away. So that's going to come into play on how deals come through and what that's going to look like. But the doc who's leaving, I guess it also depends on what's happening there too, because again, they're going to leave. There's going to be some tax burden, but also what is their plan? There's got to be a plan on the back end for it, right?
I have a plan.
You've got a plan.
Yes.
First of all, you're copying me from when I said I had a plan.
No, I'm not. People say that all the time. It's not that unique of a thing to say.
Secondly, I don't even believe you have a plan.
I have part of a plan.
Yeah, it's transitions are tough, right? Practice sales, and it's funny. The more I've worked with dentists and private practice dentists specifically, the more I realize that we're all in the same boat. In the sense of private practice professional services. We work with a few, general practice medical doctors, obviously dentists, oral surgeons, financial advisors. There's the emotional side of things, and then there's the financial side of things. And they both need to be aligned. Emotionally, to your point, if you are generous in hitting, increasing benefits and cash balance plans, it's tough to have someone come in there and not have the same philosophy or have the same wherewithal to maintain that. And that's a tough one because you're letting go, right? And that may have some consequences, some impacts, because it may not stay the same. If you're going to sell the DSO route, I can almost certain it's not going to stay the same. So there's the emotional side of letting go of, now this is no longer your business to run, it's someone else's to make those decisions. And that's a tough one to people. And there's the financial decision. So yes, there's the component of tax management, cash flow management, because those first 3 years of retirement, we always view as like the danger zone. And the analogy we use is like when you're taking off in a plane or trying to land a plane, taking off is, those first 10,000 feet is really important to the early stage career individuals to start doing the right habits and saving and things like that. And then landing the plane is really important too, because you don't want to hit an air pocket at 2,000 feet, right? That's not a good day for anyone.
You know how to fly, don't you?
No. Do you?
Oh, no.
Do you have that copyrighted? Because I want to use that.
It is trademark, sorry. I'll let you for a nominal fee. But it's so important, and people just think, to your point, I think, Cheryl, that, well, markets just do this, and I'm like, they're choppy, and we try to provide shock absorbers in terms of cash flow management and setting aside cash flows for taxes. And the first couple of years will be very scary. They always are. People are going to say, I have no more money coming in the pot because I'm used to just working more. Well, if I want to go on a vacation, I'll just add another day to the schedule, right? Or, whatever it may be. You can't do that anymore. And that's scary. And then you have this year or two period where financially markets are down. You have to sell equity. They're never going to rebound. So you got built shock absorber there. And then psychologically, I've seen it go both ways, where people are like, we can't go out to eat anymore because now we have no more money. And we have to say, like, it's okay. Here's the modeling. We've been very conservative. We model these different scenarios. We do a ton of what ifs, and to be okay. And we give people the permission to actually spend the hard-earned money that they've saved. And I've also seen on the other side where people, it's more abstract, to put it kindly. And sometimes it's one party, sometimes both, sometimes, there's just a lack of concreteness to, hey, money goes out, that equals I'm lowering the probability that I'm going to have enough money when I'm 90, right? And that's where I know Shannon and I really work to really get to know the individual. And Shannon does an amazing job of this, really knowing the psychological component of it, what's going to set a person off. And maybe Kelly, you can steal this one too, because I look at risk tolerance as like pain tolerance.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
What?
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Everyone says that they gotta, I'm pretty tough, I have a pain tolerance until they hit that level, and then they act very emotionally. And the same thing with risk, right? Everyone says, oh, I can stomach a moderate portfolio or I can handle it until that 2022 happens or 2008 or 2000 happens, and then they freak out. And then they make bad decisions and they can never recover. So that exit, that landing is very much in the financial modeling, but almost more so on the emotional connection and psychologically making sure people are prepared.
Yeah, Shannon and I discussed just recently a client and really talking about the three kind of buckets of money. So you don't have to freak out. You have that, and Shannon, you could probably explain it better than I could, where you have the three buckets.
Yeah, it's just essentially you're setting it up so that, you know where your next 5 years of income is coming from. So kind of what Shay was talking about, that's invested appropriately. So if the market's doing what it's doing, you're not concerned what's on the TV because you're like, okay, I'm good. I know where my next 5 years of income is coming from. But then also to not outlive that money, we want to make sure that money's still working for you. So then that next bucket's going to be invested a little bit more aggressively and then, continue down. And so it's just essentially replenishing the cash bucket of what you're living off of, because that's the biggest thing. Society does a great job of telling us that we need to save, but nobody ever tells us. There's not a lot of education around like, okay, well now how do we, land the plane or get down the mountain? What do we do now? And so that's where we can really come alongside clients and model that out for them so that they can see the visual. And it's not just this idea of like, oh yeah,
it's not so abstract.
Correct. There's more. Yeah. You're giving them more the blueprint essentially.
Well, and I think what's, when people talk about retiring, when I say, okay, that's great, let's talk about this because you need this money to last you about another 30 years. And they're like, oh, 30 years. They don't think of it. They just think about retiring. Right. They don't think about there's a longevity piece to it. And it has to, there is a timeline that you're following. And when they hear 30 years and then then they start to kind of doing some math in their head, like, so we need to really plan for that. Because you're going to have 30 years of reliance on this money, and we need to make sure it's there for you. Yeah, exactly. But when I have that conversation, it's kind of a little jarring at times because people, I don't think they think about that. That's a thing. Longevity is tough because there are some people who I spoke to someone. She's like, my mother lived to be 102, and I'm like, oh, that's awesome, great. And others don't have that same experience. So there is again that depends. But we also don't want to plan for, I'm only going to live to 86, but
right.
105.
It's always interesting when you're talking to someone and they're like, well, I'm not going to make it to 85. And so they want you to model it out. And you're like, okay, well, we can look at that, but let's also have some backups because we want you to be around.
Do you want to put that in writing?
Exactly. So.
Yeah. You don't want to end up working for DoorDash.
Correct.
At 90.
Exactly. Yeah. Just making sure. Yeah. We're doing all the things to make sure that you get to decide what your retirement looks like.
Walmart reader.
Yeah.
I did have a question. So I don't know if anyone here, are y'all familiar with the book, The Millionaire Next Door?
Sure. I think it's on my bookshelf somewhere in there.
Yeah. So in the book, he specifically talks about, or they specifically talk about the dental clients, I guess, that they have are somewhat prone to lifestyle creep. They're making they've got a lot of revenue coming in, and they're overspending. So they have those two categories. I think they're called like the UAWs and the PAWs, the prodigious accumulators of wealth and the under accumulators of wealth. So when you're, educating your clients, do you typically tell them things like, like how do you recommend they attack their debt if they have, huge amounts from student loans versus personal credit cards versus, actual tangible things like, I don't know, giant TVs or vehicles or things like that. Do you tell them like, okay, start with the smaller one, go for the high interest one? That's a question that I would be interested in.
Yeah. You didn't ask this, but I'm definitely going to come to that. The one other thing, because I'm probably going to forget if I don't bring it up, is the other thing people don't realize where lifestyle creep comes in. They're running a lot of stuff through their business. And now you guys probably see it all the time, and they don't realize, oh, my lifestyle is not X, it's X plus Y because it was a business expense for that Y. It was a CE thing or fill in the blank. I've seen some wild stuff from the CPAs we work with, and
No, this could be explained. Dad, we had the FISA clients.
Right, the porterhouse from Argentina.
The expensive champagne and the wine. We had to buy champagne.
You can't technically run the vet bill through that, the practice and things like that. So those are hidden lifestyle creeps, and I would be very cognizant to make sure when you are thinking about that retirement that you actually look at your actual lifestyle, not the lifestyle plus what you've actually run through the business. Like cell phones and basic stuff like that adds up. But to your actual question about there's a lot of different philosophies, right? There's a snowballing where you kind of take the small debt first and you kind of creep up. From a pure economic standpoint, highest interest rate first, right? There's good debt, there's bad debt, right? I would say mortgages, student loans, even I would say those have a accretive present value or a future value that should be higher than the present, right? Investing in yourself from a student loan standpoint or investing in a primary real estate, those should have some return on investment per se.
Right.
Student or credit card debt, car loans, those are things that are depreciating assets, right? Student credit card debt, I would say first and foremost, that seems like the easy layup. Interest rates are super high, revolving. You don't want to be that person that had $5,000 in debt and in 20 years is now $60,000 in debt because you didn't pay it down.
Yeah.
A huge component of like run everything through a credit card, but pay it off every month, right?
Yes.
So you actually know what you spend on, so we don't have to badger people about budgeting. Like I see my credit card statement and that's what I'm running my lifestyle on, but pay it off each month. So that I almost look at it as like credit card is the first and foremost.
Yeah.
Then it's like car payments, things are depreciating. And I know people want to lease and run things through businesses, but I would say depreciating assets, boats, cars, things like that. And then the final one would be, or then student loans and then primary residences.
Now,
or practice loan. I would throw practice loans, obviously, as a necessary payoff.
Right. And the practice loan to me is a good leverage.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
I think practice loan is good debt.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody
Assuming
wants
the
that.
rate makes sense and your production levels make sense.
Yeah. Now, the question I get a lot of times, especially when we're talking about retirement plans for young docs is, okay, I have my student loans and I want to save for retirement.
Yeah.
Where do I deploy my dollars to their best use when I'm a new doc? Like I just met with a doctor last week, brand new doctor, just starting out, has the opportunity to participate in the 401k plan in his office, but has some student loan debt, not 300,000, thank goodness. But
there's some more detailed calculations. The one thing I would want to know is this is where we work very closely with CPAs. What's your effective tax rate?
Mhm.
Right. So $1 put into a retirement account, how much taxes are you actually saving versus what the interest rate on your student loan, right? So there's some financial calculations you want to make sure you're doing first and foremost.
Mhm.
Income levels, right? Like projections of income levels today versus the future, what's the potential forgiveness for some of that down the road.
Mhm.
Those can have some impact on decision how you're filing taxes. We have clients that file jointly, some file married, file separately because of some of the loan forgiveness provisions on some student loans. So there's some nuance to the answer that you would want to work with your financial professional on. And I would encourage them, if they're not in coordination with the CPA, the financial advisor is probably not doing the best job possible for you. So there should be a hand in glove relationship between the CPA and the financial advisor helping you make that decision. The second thing I would say is there a 401k match? So,
Right.
you know, free money is a good thing.
Yeah.
I would do at a minimum up to 401k match. And if there's additional free cash flow, it kind of comes into a risk tolerance question. For me personally, I'd probably put more of it into paying down debt for optionality in my career to say, hey, you know what, if I didn't like this corporate dentistry route and I had to take on additional and take maybe step back from a cash flow standpoint to buy into private practice, I would want that optionality. For other people, if that's not the case and I just want to, you know, continue to sock away more money in the retirement account and pay down student loan over time, that's an option. But that's where some of it's a personal decision. So I would say easy layup is look at tax arbitrage opportunities.
Okay.
The match on the 401k plan, if there is one, and then it becomes a personal decision on the other part.
Yeah, some people are just like, I just don't want to see that debt anymore.
Yeah.
And if that's their driving force, then it's, you know, try to figure out a way to do that. So
I would be curious to you guys, like, what do you see and maybe, you know, Rachel, and some of these questions, we get a lot of questions now on like the financial impact and oh my gosh, look at the equity component of this and the valuation. We have a hard time, or not hard time, I would say we have education to help them understand the deal. How much education do you guys have to do on the deal structure and the tax components and the difference between 1099 and W-2 and the taxation of what you cannot run through the business anymore versus that, and how do you help that? Because that feeds into our modeling and free cash flows and everything like that.
Out of 100% of the time I spend on evaluation, probably 70% of that is identifying discretionary expenses. You know, that can be all those extra expenses you run through your business because, you know, tax strategy and benefits of being a business owner, but also sometimes those expenses are actually too low. So we have to make sure that we're representing true, you know, operating expenses.
an example of that would be maybe when a spouse is working for you as the office manager and we're paying a low salary.
Yeah, or you own the office
Building.
that you're in, so you don't pay yourself fair market value rent expense.
Right.
You know, if you're underpaying yourself $30,000, that can be a significant hit to your practice value. So
I ask that just because it's really difficult to be a really good practitioner and a really good business owner. And that's typically what we find is the biggest educational thing, and why, as a selfish plug, like why working with a financial advisor that is in coordination with the CPA is so important, because it is a lot to understand all those valuation metrics, to understand when to hire, how to hire, what the right net income ratios are versus how much you should be covering for overhead, like the benchmarking data. That's so important if you're running a private practice. And that's, if we're working with an individual that doesn't have a really good CPA relationship, it's really hard for us to do a great job because we don't get that raw data or like real-time data to help make good financial guidance decisions.
Yeah.
that's a lot of the benefit that, you know, when I do evaluation for a client that is a Burgmaier Associates client, they get a lot of that education just from being our client. But I also do a lot of evaluations, you know, for people who either, you know, don't have an accountant at all, you know, they're doing internal bookkeeping, or they don't really have a close relationship with their CPA. And we're going, oh my gosh, I hate to tell you this, but you really should have looked at this a long time ago. We really push for people to start looking. You know, we like to say, if we could get people on like the 5 to 10 year plan, you know, when we're valuing, we're looking at historical information. I like to see 5 years of data. It doesn't mean I may use all 5 years of data, but your value is based on historical information. So if you haven't really taken advantage of that last 5 years, especially the last 2 years or so, to really position yourself strongly, then there's not much I can do for you.
Yeah.
But if you really focus on, you know, that last stretch before you're ready to sell, then someone like us or other CPA who's really willing to work with you closely can help you make good decisions to be in a great, you know, strong position to get, you know, maximum value.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Like, just going back to Josh's question about lifestyle creep, it's so important because there's so much, you know, most of the really good dentists out there, they're great practitioners, right? They're out there with patients, they're doing great work. they see people coming in, they know they're busy, they don't really know the net profitability of it, they don't know where they should be, they don't know how that's going to dictate kind of what they actually need for evaluation to begin with, right? So I don't know what my lifestyle is in a true basis. I don't know if I can retire or not, because I don't know what backing into that lifestyle, what that we call like a evaluation gap, what I actually need. If I just want to get out and $1 million for the practice is enough, or it's too little. Like all those things, it's so important to help answer, is this a good deal or not? Well, Kelly, it depends, right?
Get all you want out of life, it depends.
Yeah, it depends.
It always depends.
And the practice is worth what someone's willing to pay. Doesn't
That's
matter necessarily what the numbers say.
Yeah.
But it helps to have the numbers, because